I thought the HOA had finally crossed the line when they demolished my bridge. I had no idea they were about to cost themselves $1.8 million. My name is Daniel Carter, and I owned a 12-acre property on the edge of a quiet suburban community. At the center of my land was a small private lake, and crossing the narrowest part of that lake was an old wooden bridge. My grandfather built it decades ago. It wasn't fancy, just heavy wooden beams, weathered railings, and enough room for one vehicle. But it connected the farmhouse to the eastern side of my property. I used it almost every day. Then Karen Whitmore became president of the HOA. Karen was the kind of person who believed every piece of land within sight of her house was somehow part of her neighborhood. One afternoon, she came to my gate holding an HOA violation notice. She pointed toward my bridge. That structure doesn't meet community appearance standards. I laughed. It's on my private property. Karen replied, the lake affects the neighborhood view. I told her the HOA had absolutely no authority over my bridge or lake. She walked away without another word. 3 days later, I heard heavy machinery. When I reached the lake, my stomach dropped. An excavator was parked beside the bridge. 2 workers were removing the wooden beams, and standing behind them was Karen. I demanded to know what she was doing. She calmly said, the HOA is removing an unsafe structure. I asked to see a court order. She didn't have one. I asked for a property authorization. She didn't have that either. She simply told me the HOA had approved the demolition. Then the workers finished tearing the bridge apart. The entire job reportedly cost the HOA about $2,000. Karen thought they had solved the problem. They had actually created one, because there was something she didn't know about my lake. Years earlier, my grandfather had worked with the county to establish an easement and access agreement connected to property. The bridge wasn't just a decorative structure. It provided legally documented access to the eastern section of the land. And the lake itself was connected to a drainage system that affected downstream properties. By destroying the bridge, the HOA had interfered with that access. But the damage didn't stop there. Without the bridge, maintenance equipment couldn't reach the eastern shoreline. A drainage inspection was delayed. Then heavy rain arrived. Water began rising rapidly. The damaged access route made emergency maintenance much more difficult. I immediately contacted an attorney. We pulled the original property records, survey maps, easement documents, maintenance agreements, lake drainage plans, everything. And then my attorney found something that changed the entire case. The HOA had received documents years earlier showing that the lake and bridge were privately controlled. They knew. They simply ignored them. We filed a lawsuit. At first, Karen wasn't worried. She told residents the HOA would win easily. She called my lawsuit a ridiculous money grab. Then the court ordered discovery. That was when the HOA's internal emails became evidence. One email from Karen said, just remove the bridge. He'll give up. Another board member asked whether they had legal authority. Karen replied that nobody would challenge them. That sentence became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Then engineers inspected the lake. They discovered that the bridge demolition and blocked access had contributed to serious maintenance problems. The HOA had not only interfered with my property, their actions had created measurable financial and environmental consequences. The lawsuit became much bigger than anyone expected. At the final hearing, the HOA's attorney tried to argue that the demolition had been a simple community improvement. My attorney placed the original property documents before the judge. Then came the photographs. Then the engineering reports. Then the HOA emails. The courtroom went completely quiet. The judge reviewed the evidence for several minutes. And then the ruling came. The HOA was ordered to pay approximately $1.8 million in damages, restoration costs, legal consequences, and related compensation. The same organization that had spent only $2,000 demolishing my bridge had now created a liability nearly 900 times larger. Karen sat completely still. She didn't argue. She didn't point fingers. She just stared at the floor. The HOA was also required to restore access and cooperate with lake repairs. Months later, a new bridge was built. It was stronger than the original. And this time, The permits, surveys, engineering approvals, and property boundaries were all documented properly. One evening, I stood on a new bridge looking across the lake. The water was calm. The trees reflected perfectly on the surface. And I thought about how different everything could have been. The HOA thought they were removing a $2,000 eyesore. Instead, they demolished the wrong bridge, ignored the wrong property records, and turned a simple dispute into an enormous lawsuit. The lesson was simple. Never confuse an HOA's rules with ownership rights. And never assume that because something is old, quiet, or inconvenient, you have the right to destroy it. Because sometimes the smallest demolition can create the biggest bill. And for this HOA, that bill was $1.8 million.